This is a developing story connected to the well-known family from OutDaughtered. But before going further, it's important to make one thing clear. What you are about to hear is a dramatized and hypothetical narrative created for storytelling and awareness purposes. The Busby family has always been known for their strong connection, their unity, and the way they handle life together in front of the public. Over the years, viewers have watched them grow, face challenges, and support each other through everything. Their image has always reflected stability, love, and consistency. But in this imagined situation, everything begins to slowly shift in a way no one expected. It doesn't happen overnight. At first, nothing looks serious. Small changes appear, almost unnoticeable unless someone is really paying attention. The kind of changes that can easily be dismissed as normal behavior, especially in a growing child. Blayke Busby, the eldest in the family, starts to become quieter. Not completely withdrawn, but noticeably different from her usual self. She speaks less during family moments. She seems distracted, often lost in her own thoughts. The energy that people were used to seeing in her slowly fades into something more reserved. At first, Adam and Danielle don't panic. Like many parents, they assume it could just be a phase. Growing up comes with emotional shifts, new thoughts, and personal space. It's natural. They try to give her room, thinking she might just be figuring things out on her own. But over time, the pattern continues. It's not just about being quiet anymore. There's a distance that starts to form. Conversations become shorter. Eye contact becomes less frequent. Even simple family interactions begin to feel slightly disconnected. And this is where concern begins to grow. Because when change is consistent, it becomes harder to ignore. The family starts noticing that Blayke is spending more time alone, not in a peaceful or relaxed way, but in a way that feels isolating. She avoids group activities more often. She seems uninterested in things she once enjoyed. At this point, the situation is still unclear. There are no obvious signs pointing to anything serious. No major incidents, no direct explanations, just a feeling that something is not right. And sometimes, that feeling is the most difficult part. Because without clear answers, it becomes harder to know how to respond. Adam begins to observe more closely. He pays attention to her behavior, her routines, and even the small details. Danielle also becomes more aware, trying to gently check in without pushing too hard. They don't want to create pressure, but they also don't want to stay silent. This balance becomes challenging. Do they step in immediately, or do they wait? Do they ask direct questions, or do they let her come forward on her own? These are the kinds of thoughts that start to take over. Meanwhile, inside the household, the overall atmosphere begins to shift slightly. It's not something obvious to outsiders, but within the family it can be felt. Moments that used to be full of energy now carry a subtle tension. The younger sisters may not fully understand what's happening, but they can sense that something is different. Children often pick up on emotional changes even when nothing is explained to them. And that adds another layer of complexity. Because now, it's not just about one person. It's about the entire family dynamic. Blayke, on the other hand, continues to drift further into her own space. She doesn't openly express what she's feeling. She doesn't clearly communicate what's going on inside her mind, and that silence becomes one of the biggest concerns. Because when someone stops sharing, it creates distance, and when that distance grows, it becomes harder to reach them. At this stage, everything is still uncertain. There are questions, but no answers. There is concern, but no confirmation. And there is a growing realization that this may not be something that will simply pass with time. Something deeper may be happening. Something that requires attention, patience, and understanding. But the family has not yet reached the point where they fully understand the situation. They are still in the phase of observation, still trying to connect the dots. still hoping that whatever is happening will resolve before it becomes something more serious. And that is where this story truly begins. As time continues, the uncertainty that once surrounded the situation slowly begins to take a clearer shape. What initially felt like a phase now starts to feel more serious. Blayke Busby's behaviour doesn't return to normal. Instead, the changes become more noticeable, more consistent, and harder to ignore. The distance that once appeared subtle now feels real. Her routine begins to shift. She starts keeping more things to herself. Simple questions are answered with short responses. Conversations that once flowed naturally now feel forced or incomplete. Even when she is physically present, there is a sense that her mind is somewhere else. For Adam and Danielle, this becomes increasingly difficult. They are no longer just observing. They are now trying to understand. They begin asking more direct questions, but carefully. Not in a confrontational way, but in a way that shows concern. They try to create a safe space where Blayke can open up without feeling pressured. But the response they receive is limited. Blayke doesn't fully explain what she's going through. She doesn't completely shut down either, but she doesn't let them in enough to understand the full picture. And that creates a growing tension. Because when communication is incomplete, assumptions begin to form. Adam starts to feel that something external might be influencing her. Danielle begins to worry that there could be emotional struggles that Blayke is not ready to talk about. Both of them are trying to stay calm, but internally, the concern continues to build. At the same time, small behavioral signs begin to appear. Nothing extreme at first, but enough to raise questions. Her sleep patterns seem irregular. Her energy levels fluctuate. Some days she appears distant and low, while other days she seems restless and uneasy. These changes don't follow a clear pattern, which makes them even more confusing. The family environment starts to adjust around this situation. Adam becomes more attentive, trying to spend one-on-one time with her. Danielle focuses on emotional support, attempting to connect through gentle conversations. They both try different approaches, hoping something will help her open up. But progress is slow, and patience begins to feel heavy. The younger sisters continue to notice the shift as well. They may not fully understand it, but they feel the difference in the atmosphere. The energy in the house is no longer as light as it used to be. Moments that were once effortless now require effort. And this is where the emotional weight starts to grow. Because the family is trying, but they are not seeing clear results. Blayke, meanwhile, continues to pull slightly further away. Not in a dramatic way, but in a gradual, consistent way. She becomes more protective of her personal space. She spends more time alone. She avoids deeper conversations whenever they begin to touch sensitive areas. And this creates a quiet barrier. A barrier that is not visible, but strongly felt. At this point, Adam and Danielle begin to consider the possibility that this situation may require more than just family support. They start thinking about whether outside help might be necessary. Not because they have given up, but because they understand that some situations need more than what they can provide on their own. Still, they hesitate. Because taking that step means accepting that the situation is serious. And accepting that is not easy. They continue trying to reach her in different ways. They adjust their approach. They remain patient. They avoid judgment. They remind her, in subtle ways, that she is supported, that she is not alone, and that she can talk whenever she is ready. But even with all of that, something still feels missing. There is still a gap. A gap between what the family sees and what Blayke is actually experiencing. And that gap continues to widen slowly. At this stage, the situation has not yet reached a breaking point, but it is moving in that direction. The signs are becoming clearer. The concern is becoming stronger. And the feeling that something deeper is happening is no longer just a possibility. It is becoming a reality that the family can no longer ignore. They are now standing at a point where waiting may not be enough, and the next steps they take will become critical. At this stage, the situation reaches a point where uncertainty is no longer the main issue. Now it becomes about response. Adam and Danielle begin to realize that waiting and observing will not be enough anymore. The pattern has continued for too long, and the changes in Blayke Busby are no longer something that can be explained as temporary. They decide to become more direct. Not in a forceful way, but in a more intentional and focused way. Conversations are no longer casual check-ins. They now carry weight. They are designed to understand, to reach deeper, and to break through the silence that has been building. They choose their moments carefully. Timing becomes important. Tone becomes important. Even the smallest details in how they approach her start to matter, because they understand that one wrong approach could push her further away. When they finally sit down with her for a more serious conversation, the atmosphere is different. It is calm, but heavy. They express their concern clearly. They let her know that they have noticed the changes. They remind her that she doesn't have to go through anything alone. They ask her directly but gently, what is going on? For a moment it seems like she might open up. There is hesitation, there is emotion, there is a pause that feels longer than usual. But then the response remains limited. She shares small pieces, but not enough to fully explain what she is experiencing. It's as if she wants to speak, but something is holding her back. And that moment becomes difficult, because it shows that there is something there, but it is still out of reach. Adam and Danielle leave that conversation with mixed feelings. On one hand, they feel slightly closer to understanding. On the other hand, they realize how much is still hidden. And that realization pushes them to take the next step. They begin exploring professional support. This is not an easy decision. For many families, this step comes with hesitation. It requires acceptance that the situation is beyond what can be handled internally. It also requires trust in someone outside the family. But they move forward. They start looking into counselling and guidance, focusing on creating a safe and structured space where Blayke might feel more comfortable expressing herself. At the same time, they continue their role as parents. They remain present. They stay involved. They keep communication open, even when responses are limited. They make sure she knows that support is always there, regardless of how slow the process feels. Inside the household, the dynamic continues to shift. There is more awareness now, more attention, more emotional sensitivity. The younger sisters begin to notice that something serious is happening. Even without full explanations, they can sense the concern. The family becomes more careful with how they interact, trying to maintain balance while dealing with the situation. Blayke, meanwhile, is at a critical point. She is not fully disconnected, but she is not fully engaged either. She exists somewhere in between. And that in-between space is where the real challenge lies. Because it is unpredictable. Some days, she seems slightly more open. Other days, she withdraws again. There is no clear direction, no steady progress, and no simple solution. This creates emotional strain. Not just for her, but for the entire family. Adam begins to feel the pressure of responsibility more intensely. Danielle feels the emotional weight of not fully being able to reach her daughter. Both of them are trying to stay strong, but internally, the situation is affecting them deeply. And yet, they do not give up. They continue showing patience. They continue showing care. They continue trying, even when the results are not immediate. Because they understand something important. This is not something that can be fixed quickly. This is something that requires time, consistency, and trust. But even with all their efforts, there is still a sense that the situation is moving towards something more serious. The warning signs are no longer subtle. They are becoming clearer. And the feeling that a major turning point is approaching begins to grow stronger. The family is doing everything they can. But sometimes, even when everything is done right, the situation can still escalate. And that is where this story begins to take a more intense direction. At this stage, the situation reaches a point where uncertainty is no longer the main issue. Now, it becomes about response. Adam and Danielle begin to realize that waiting and observing will not be enough anymore. The pattern has continued for too long, and the changes in Blayke Busby are no longer something that can be explained as temporary. They decide to become more direct. Not in a forceful way, but in a more intentional and focused way. Conversations are no longer casual check-ins. They now carry weight. They are designed to understand, to reach deeper, and to break through the silence that has been building. They express their concern clearly. They remind her that she is not alone. They try to create a space where she can speak without fear of judgment. And for a moment, it feels like progress might finally happen. But the response remains incomplete. She shares small pieces, but not enough to fully explain what she is going through. It becomes clear that something deeper is affecting her, something she is not ready or not able to fully express. That realization changes everything. Because now the family understands that this is not just emotional distance. This is something more serious. They begin exploring professional help. They look into counseling, guidance, and structured support systems that could help her open up in a way she hasn't been able to at home. It is not an easy step, but it becomes a necessary one. At the same time, they continue doing everything they can as a family. They stay present. They stay patient. They continue showing care, even when progress feels slow. But despite all of this, the situation continues to move in a difficult direction. The signs become more visible. Her behavior becomes more unpredictable. Her emotional state becomes harder to read. There are moments where she seems overwhelmed, followed by moments where she completely withdraws again. And then, the turning point arrives. An incident occurs that forces everything into the open. It is no longer something that can be managed quietly within the family. Authorities become involved in this dramatized scenario. For Adam and Danielle, this moment feels unreal. Everything they were trying to prevent has now happened. There is shock, there is confusion, and there is a deep emotional weight that is difficult to describe. Danielle struggles to process the situation. Adam tries to remain steady, but the pressure is clear. The family known for strength and unity is now facing one of the hardest moments they have ever experienced. And yet, even in this moment, something important remains unchanged. They do not turn away. They do not give up. Instead, their focus shifts from trying to prevent the situation to trying to rebuild from it. Because at this point, the goal is no longer control. It is recovery. It is understanding. It is support. They begin to accept that this is a long process, something that will take time, something that cannot be rushed. The idea of immediate solutions fades, and in its place comes patience and commitment. The family starts to reflect, not with blame, but with awareness. They think about communication, about emotional connection, about the importance of recognizing early signs. They begin to understand how complex situations like this can be, and how easily they can develop without clear warning. And through all of this, one message becomes clear. Even strong families face difficult moments. Even loving environments can go through unexpected challenges. But what defines a family is not the absence of problems. It is how they respond when those problems appear. In this dramatized story connected to OutDaughtered, the Busby family continues to stand together. Not perfectly. Not without struggle, but with persistence, with care, and with the belief that no situation is beyond hope. Because at the end of the day, recovery is possible. Change is possible.